"Excuse me, madam, that's my seat." The 12-year-old's voice was polite, soft, the kind of respectful tone and fear parents teach their black children to use when addressing white adults, hoping it will protect them from harm. But the white woman sitting in seat 12A of Delta Flight 4728 looked up from her magazine with pure contempt twisting her face. "Your seat?" She let out a harsh laugh. "I don't think so, sweetheart. This is first class. Why don't you go back to the economy where you belong? Kids like you shouldn't even be up here." The girl, 12-year-old Jasmine Davis, stood frozen in the aisle of the Boeing 737, her boarding pass clutched in her trembling hand, her backpack heavy on her shoulders. This was Delta Flight 4728 from Atlanta to Los Angeles, scheduled to depart in 20 minutes, and Jasmine was supposed to be excited about visiting her Aunt Michelle for a whole month during summer break. But instead, she found herself face to face with racism so casual, so brazen, that it took her breath away. The woman was maybe 55 years old, dressed in expensive clothes, a designer handbag on the seat beside her, diamond rings catching the overhead light. She looked like someone important, someone powerful, someone who was used to getting exactly what she wanted. "But ma'am," Jasmine tried again, her voice shaking now, "this is seat 12. That's what my boarding pass says. See?" She held out her phone showing the digital boarding pass, the seat assignment clear as day. The woman's eyes narrowed with disgust. "I don't care what that says. You probably got that ticket through some welfare program or charity handout. Real people who actually work for a living and pay full price shouldn't have to sit next to people like you. You probably can't even afford to be up here." Her voice was loud now, making sure other passengers could hear, establishing her dominance, her belief that this black child was beneath her and didn't deserve to share premium space. Jasmine felt tears burning behind her eyes, felt the weight of every passenger's stare, felt the familiar shame that came with being treated as less than human simply because of her skin color. The woman continued, her voice dripping with venom. "And frankly, I paid good money for peace, not to deal with unaccompanied children who probably don't even know how to behave in first class. Why don't you run along back where you came from before you embarrass yourself further?" Other passengers watched the confrontation unfold, some with phones already out recording, but not a single person spoke up. Not one adult said this is wrong. A businessman across the aisle looked uncomfortable but turned away. A young couple 2 rows back whispered to each other but stayed silent. They just watched, silent witnesses to a child being publicly humiliated, choosing comfort over courage. But before we continue with what happened on Delta Flight 4728 that day, we'll want you to show your stand and displeasure against racism by sharing this video so many people can see it. Also, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories on racism and discrimination that many airlines swept under the rug. Jasmine looked around desperately for a flight attendant, for anyone who might help, and finally spotted one near the galley. She walked toward her, trying to hold back tears, trying to be brave the way her parents had taught her. "Excuse me, a woman is sitting in my assigned seat, and she won't move. She said really mean things to me. Can you please help me?" The flight attendant, a middle-aged white woman named Jennifer, barely glanced at Jasmine before responding in a tone that suggested she was already annoyed. "Honey, if someone is already sitting there, just find an empty seat. We need to close the doors and take off. Don't make this difficult." "But it is my seat," Jasmine insisted, her voice cracking. "I paid for it. I have a boarding pass." The woman said, "I don't belong in first class." Jennifer sighed with exasperation, like Jasmine was causing unnecessary drama. "Let me see your boarding pass." Jasmine showed it to her, and Jennifer walked back to row 12, spoke quietly to the woman, who immediately switched to a sweet, innocent tone, shaking her head with theatrical concern. Then Jennifer returned to Jasmine with a patronizing smile that made Jasmine's stomach drop. "The passenger says she's been sitting there since boarding began, and you're harassing her. Are you sure you're not confused about your seat assignment? There's an empty seat in economy. Why don't you just go sit there and stop causing problems?" Jasmine stood there, 12 years old and completely powerless, realizing that no one was going to help her, that this woman was going to steal her seat, and everyone was going to let it happen because in their eyes, the word of a wealthy white woman would always carry more weight than the truth from a black child's mouth. If you believe no child should ever be dismissed and humiliated like this, keep watching. If you think racial discrimination on airplanes is something we left in the 1960s, you need to see what happens next. And if you've ever been treated like you don't belong somewhere because of how you look, drop a comment below and tell us your story. We're reading every single one. Also, tell us where you are watching from and what time you are watching right now. This story doesn't end the way you think because we're exposing these incidents that airlines don't want you to see. But to understand how a 12-year-old girl ended up being publicly humiliated and denied her paid seat on a Delta flight, you need to go back 10 hours to when Jasmine Davis's day started with so much excitement she could barely sleep the night before. Jasmine Davis was 12 years old, a 7th grader at Washington Middle School in Atlanta, who loved everything about science. She was the kind of kid who spent weekends watching documentaries about space exploration, who'd won first place at her school science fair 3 years running, who dreamed of becoming an aerospace engineer and working for NASA someday. She was on the honor roll every semester, polite to everyone, the type of child who volunteered to help teachers clean up after class and tutored younger students who struggled with math. Jasmine lived with both her parents in a comfortable home in suburban Atlanta, though most people didn't know that her father, Marcus Davis, was actually the CEO of Delta Airlines. He kept his family life extremely private, never posted photos of his children on social media, never brought them to corporate events, wanting them to grow up normal without the pressure and attention that came with being the children of a major airline executive. This trip to Los Angeles mattered more than any vacation Jasmine had ever taken. Her Aunt Michelle, her mother's sister, had just gotten her PhD in marine biology, and Jasmine was going to spend a whole month with her in California, visiting aquariums, going to the beach, maybe even going out on a research boat. It was a reward for Jasmine's excellent grades and a chance for her to explore whether marine biology might be another career path she'd love. Her parents had debated whether she was ready to fly alone as an unaccompanied minor, but Jasmine had insisted she was mature enough, responsible enough, and her father had finally agreed, purchasing a first-class ticket so she'd be comfortable and well looked after by the crew. That morning, Jasmine's mother had woken her at 5, made her favorite breakfast of blueberry pancakes and scrambled eggs, helped her pack her carry-on with books about ocean life, snacks, her tablet loaded with movies, and her lucky stuffed dolphin named Splash that she'd had since she was 4. Her mother had braided her hair the night before, laid out nice clothes, a purple t-shirt, and new jeans, wanting her daughter to look presentable because they both knew the world judged black children more harshly. Her father had driven her to the airport personally, using the employee entrance so she could check in without going through the main terminal crowds. He'd walked her to security, hugged her tight, reminded her to be polite to everyone, to call if she needed anything, to remember that she belonged everywhere she went. "You're going to do great, baby girl," Marcus had said, kissing her forehead. "First class all the way. You're going to love it. The seats are huge, they bring you snacks, and you can watch whatever movies you want. Just relax and enjoy the flight." Jasmine had been so excited, practically bouncing as she went through security, waving goodbye to her father, who watched until she was out of sight. At the gate, she'd sat reading about bioluminescent jellyfish, occasionally looking up to watch the planes outside, imagining herself in one soon, flying across the country independently for the first time. When her boarding group was called, Jasmine walked down the jetway with her backpack and carry-on, her heart racing with excitement and nervousness. A friendly flight attendant named Marcus, a young black man, greeted her at the aircraft door. "Welcome aboard, sweetheart. First time flying alone?" Jasmine nodded shyly. "You're going to do great. Let me help you find your seat." He looked at her boarding pass. 12A, beautiful window seat. "Right this way." They walked together through the first-class cabin, Jasmine marveling at the big leather seats, the extra space, the passengers already settling in with champagne and newspapers. But when they reached row 12, Jasmine's excitement died instantly. There was already someone sitting in seat 12A. A white woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in expensive clothes, designer handbag on the seat beside her, diamond jewelry glinting under the cabin lights, sitting exactly where Jasmine was supposed to be. The flight attendant, Marcus, checked Jasmine's boarding pass again, checked the seat number, and his expression shifted to confusion and then professional concern. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely to the woman. I believe you're in the wrong seat. This young lady has 12A on her boarding pass. The woman didn't even look up from her phone. No, I'm not. This is my seat. I always sit in 12A. Marcus tried again, his tone still respectful. Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass, please? The woman sighed with irritation and handed it over. Marcus looked at it, and his face tightened. Ma'am, your seat is actually 24B in the main cabin. This is first class seat 12A, and it's assigned to this passenger. That's when the woman finally looked at Jasmine, really looked at her, and the disgust that crossed her face made Jasmine's stomach drop. She looked Jasmine up and down, taking in her brown skin, her braided hair, her youth, and made a decision in that instant that this black child did not belong in first class, and she was not going to move. There must be some mistake, the woman said coldly. I upgraded to first class. That child's ticket must be wrong. And that's when Jasmine found her voice and said the words that would start everything. Excuse me, ma'am, that's my seat. The black flight attendant Marcus's radio crackled with urgency just as the confrontation was heating up. Marcus to the galley immediately. We have a situation with catering. He looked torn, glancing between Jasmine and the woman who was now refusing to even acknowledge the boarding pass evidence. He touched Jasmine's shoulder gently. Sweetie, stay right here. I'll be back in just a minute to sort this out, okay? Don't worry. Then he hurried toward the front of the plane, leaving Jasmine standing in the aisle facing a woman who looked at her with pure contempt and a cabin full of passengers who suddenly found their phones and magazines very interesting. The woman smiled, a cold, calculating smile that told Jasmine she knew exactly what she was doing. Looks like it's just you and me now, little girl. And I'm not moving. So why don't you run along and stop making a scene? Jasmine's hands shook as she tried one more time. Please, ma'am, that's my seat. I need to sit there. My boarding pass says 12A. The woman leaned back in the seat, deliberately getting comfortable, spreading out as if to claim even more space. Your boarding pass is wrong. Or maybe you're in the wrong cabin. First class isn't for people like you. You should be grateful they even let you on the plane. People like you. The words hung in the air, the racism barely coded, obvious to everyone listening. Jasmine looked around desperately at the other passengers. A white businessman across the aisle in 12C had watched the whole thing unfold, but now suddenly needed to check his email. A young white couple in row 10 whispered to each other, the woman pulling out her phone to record, but neither of them said a word in Jasmine's defense. An elderly white man in row 11 shook his head slightly, whether in sympathy or disapproval of Jasmine, it was impossible to tell, but he stayed silent either way. Jasmine saw another flight attendant walking down the aisle, a white woman with red hair whose name tag read Sarah. She stepped into the aisle, desperation making her voice crack. Excuse me, ma'am? Can you please help me? That woman is sitting in my seat, and she won't move. I showed her my boarding pass, but she said I don't belong here. Sarah barely slowed down, gave Jasmine an annoyed glance, and kept walking. We're trying to prepare for departure, honey. Just find an open seat and sit down. But that's my seat, Jasmine insisted, following her a few steps. I paid for it. It's assigned to me. Sarah stopped and turned around, her expression making it clear she viewed Jasmine as a problem passenger, a troublemaker disrupting the smooth operation of her flight. Look, I don't have time for this right now. If there's a seating dispute, we'll sort it out after takeoff. Go sit down somewhere before you delay the whole flight. The dismissal was complete, absolute, and Jasmine realized with growing horror that none of the crew members were going to help her, that they'd already decided the white woman's presence in that seat was more legitimate than Jasmine's documented assignment. Jasmine returned to row 12, tears now flowing freely down her face, her voice breaking. Please, I just want my seat. I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you being so mean to me? The woman's face twisted with mock concern that was really just cruelty. Oh, now you're going to cry? Are you going to play victim? This is exactly why children shouldn't fly alone. You're being disruptive, you're causing problems, and you're making the other passengers uncomfortable with your drama. Then the woman did something that crossed a line from verbal abuse into physical assault. She reached out and shoved Jasmine backward, her hands making hard contact with Jasmine's shoulders, pushing her with enough force that Jasmine stumbled and nearly fell into the aisle. The 12-year-old caught herself on the seat back across the aisle, pain radiating through her shoulder where the woman's ring had dug into her skin. "That hurt?" Jasmine gasped, clutching her shoulder. "You pushed me. You hurt me." The woman's voice went even louder, performing for the whole cabin now. "I did no such thing. You're being hysterical. This child is out of control. Somebody needs to restrain her before she hurts someone. She's clearly disturbed. Where are her parents? Why is this child allowed to fly alone when she's obviously not mentally stable?" The accusations came rapid fire, each one designed to paint Jasmine as the aggressor, as the problem, as someone whose word couldn't be trusted. A flight attendant finally appeared, but it was Jennifer, the one who'd already dismissed Jasmine earlier. A passenger in row 14 had pressed their call button to report the disturbance. Jennifer took one look at Jasmine's tear-stained face, at the woman sitting calmly in the disputed seat, and made her judgment. "Young lady, you need to sit down right now. You're creating a disturbance, and we have other passengers who are being affected by your behavior. This is your final warning." Jasmine tried to explain through her tears. "She pushed me. She hurt my shoulder." She tried to show Jennifer the red mark forming where the ring had made contact, but Jennifer wasn't interested in evidence. "That's enough. If you continue this disruptive behavior, we'll have to remove you from this aircraft. Do you understand? You're being aggressive and combative, and we don't tolerate that on Delta flights. Now go find a seat in the back and sit down before I call security." Jasmine felt the world tilting, felt the injustice crushing her, felt the weight of every passenger's silence enabling this abuse. She reached into her pocket for her phone, thinking if she could just call her father, just get him on the line, he could fix this, he could make them listen. But before she could unlock her phone, Jennifer snatched it out of her hands. "No personal devices during a crew member's instruction. You're interfering with flight operations. I'm confiscating this until we land." Jasmine's last lifeline, her only connection to help, to her father, to anyone who had the power to intervene, was gone. She was completely alone, completely powerless, a 12-year-old black girl being abused by a racist passenger and punished by a racist crew for being the victim. She stood there in the aisle, shoulders shaking with sobs she couldn't control anymore, pain radiating from where she'd been pushed, her voice breaking as she said to no one and everyone, "I just wanted to sit in my seat. I didn't do anything wrong. Why is everyone being so mean to me?" But the only response was silence. Damning, complicit, guilty silence from dozens of adults who chose their comfort over a child's safety. The woman in seat 12A smiled with satisfaction, stretched out even more, and closed her eyes as if preparing for a nap, secure in the knowledge that she'd won, that the system had protected her racism, that a black child's pain and tears mattered less than her sense of entitlement. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew someone was treating you unfairly, but you felt powerless to stop it? Drop a comment if you've experienced discrimination like this. How did you handle it? Jasmine stood in the aisle for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, her whole body shaking with sobs, her shoulder throbbing where the woman had pushed her, her mind trying to process how asking for her assigned seat had turned into this nightmare. The cabin had gone quiet except for her crying, passengers pretending to be absorbed in their phones or books or conversations, anything to avoid acknowledging the child suffering right in front of them. Jennifer, the flight attendant who'd taken her phone, had already walked away toward the cockpit, probably to report that she'd handled a disruptive passenger. Finally, Jasmine couldn't stand there anymore. She grabbed her backpack from where she dropped it near row 12, clutching it to her chest like a shield, and started walking toward the back of the plane. Her vision was blurred with tears, her breath coming in hiccups, her legs unsteady beneath her. She passed row after row of passengers, some who glanced at her with what might have been sympathy but not enough to actually help, others who deliberately looked away, uncomfortable with the evidence of injustice they'd just witnessed but unwilling to be inconvenienced by getting involved. The plane was nearly full now, most seats occupied, the overhead bins stuffed with luggage, flight attendants making final preparations for departure. Jasmine made her way through the main cabin, past families with young children, business people with laptops already out, and college students with headphones on. She reached the back of the aircraft, near the last few rows and the lavatories, where the engine noise was louder, and the seats were smaller, and there was less of the premium polish that first class had. She stood there lost, not knowing where to go or what to do, just knowing she couldn't stay up front near that woman anymore, couldn't endure another second of being looked at like she was trash that didn't belong. That's when she noticed the woman in seat 34B. She was black, maybe in her 40s, dressed professionally in a business suit, and she'd been watching Jasmine's long walk from the front of the plane with an expression that combined concern and recognition, the kind of recognition that came from having experienced similar racism yourself. Their eyes met, and something in the woman's face, some kindness that had been absent from every other adult on this plane, made Jasmine's remaining composure shatter completely. Jasmine approached slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, Nam." The woman immediately set down the book she'd been pretending to read. "Yes, sweetheart? What's wrong?" And that simple question, asked with genuine care, with actual concern for Jasmine's well-being, opened the floodgates. Jasmine started crying harder, the words tumbling out between sobs. "A woman took my seat, and nobody will help me. They took my phone. They said I'm being disruptive. She pushed me, and it hurt, and I want to call my dad. May I use your phone, please? I need to call my dad. Please." The woman's expression shifted from concern to fury, the kind of righteous anger that came from understanding exactly what had happened without needing all the details. She'd seen Jasmine being marched from first class to economy, had watched the crew dismiss her, had recognized the scenario playing out because she'd lived through variations of it herself. "Baby, of course you can use my phone. Come here, sit down." She shifted to make room, and Jasmine collapsed into the middle seat beside her, her whole body shaking. The woman pulled out her iPhone and unlocked it, handing it to Jasmine with steady hands. "You take all the time you need, okay? I'm right here with you." Jasmine's fingers trembled as she dialed her father's number, the one she'd memorized years ago for emergencies. This was an emergency, even if the flight crew didn't think so, even if the other passengers had decided her suffering wasn't worth their intervention. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. "Please pick up," Jasmine whispered. "Please, Daddy, please pick up." On the 4th ring, her father's voice came through, professional and distracted because he was probably in a meeting. "Marcus Davis is speaking." "Daddy," Jasmine sobbed, and that one word carried so much pain that Marcus went completely still on the other end. "Baby girl? What's wrong? Where are you? Are you hurt?" The concern in his voice, the instant shift from CEO to protective father, made Jasmine cry even harder. "I'm on the plane, but a lady took my seat, and nobody will help me. She pushed me, and it hurt, and the flight attendants took my phone and said I'm being disruptive and everyone's being so mean and I don't know what to do. Daddy, please come get me. Please. I want to come home." Marcus's voice changed, became something cold and dangerous that Jasmine had never heard before. "What flight are you on? What's the flight number?" "Flight 4728, Jasmine managed through her tears. "To Los Angeles. We haven't taken off yet. We're still at the gate." "Good," Marcus said, and she could hear him moving, could hear the determination in his voice. "Baby, I need you to listen very carefully. I'm at the airport right now. I'm coming to you. Don't let them close that aircraft door. Tell them the CEO of Delta Airlines is boarding plane, and nobody moves until I get there. Do you understand?" "But Daddy, they won't listen to me. They don't believe anything I say." "Then you put whoever's in charge on the phone," Marcus said. "You tell them Marcus Davis is coming aboard, and if that plane moves 1 inch before I get there, people are losing their jobs. I'm 2 minutes away, baby girl. 2 minutes. Can you hold on for 2 minutes?" Jasmine nodded even though he couldn't see her. "Daddy. Please hurry. I'm hurrying, baby. I promise. Keep this phone with you. I'm coming." The black woman beside Jasmine squeezed her hand. "Is your daddy coming?" Jasmine nodded. "He's the CEO of Delta. He doesn't usually tell people, but he's coming now." The woman's eyes widened in shock and then something like vindication. "Oh, that lady and those flight attendants are about to have a very bad day." Jasmine almost smiled through her tears. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood up on shaky legs, still holding the borrowed phone. She looked toward the front of the plane, where the woman was still comfortably sprawled in seat 12A, where Jennifer and the other crew members were preparing for departure like nothing was wrong, and she felt a small spark of hope igniting in her chest. Her father was coming. The CEO was coming. And when he got here, everyone was going to learn that the scared black child they dismissed and abused wasn't powerless after all. She was Marcus Davis's daughter, and they'd made a mistake that would cost them everything. Jasmine started walking back toward the front of the plane, still crying but with purpose now, and passengers who'd ignored her before suddenly noticed her movement, noticed the phone in her hand, noticed that something had shifted. The black woman from 34B stood up and followed a few paces behind, a witness and a protector, her presence saying, "I see you, I believe you, you're not alone anymore." And somewhere outside the aircraft, in the jetway, Marcus Davis was running. Jasmine reached the front of the cabin, her tears still flowing, but her voice stronger now because her father was coming, because help was finally on the way. She approached Jennifer, the flight attendant who'd taken her phone, who was now at the aircraft door preparing to make the announcement for doors to be armed and cross-checked. "Excuse me," Jasmine said, her voice shaking but determined. "My dad is coming. He's the CEO of Delta Airlines, and he said not to close this door. He's boarding right now." Jennifer turned around with an expression of pure condescension, clearly thinking this was another desperate lie from a child who'd already proven herself to be disruptive. "Honey, we've already delayed departure because of your behavior. We're closing this door right now. Your father, whoever he is, can meet you in Los Angeles. Now go sit down in an empty seat before I have security remove you." "But my dad said," Jasmine tried again, but Jennifer cut her off sharply. "I don't care what your dad said. This aircraft is under my authority, and we're departing. Final warning." The woman in seat 12A was watching this exchange with smug satisfaction, clearly enjoying watching Jasmine be dismissed yet again. "That child has been nothing but trouble since she boarded," she called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's been harassing me, making up stories, and causing delays. Someone needs to remove her so the rest of us can get to our destination on time." Several passengers murmured agreement, their inconvenience apparently more important than a child's suffering, their comfort more valuable than justice. Jasmine felt panic rising again. What if they closed the door before her father got there? What if they didn't believe who he was? What if they removed her from the plane before he could help her? She looked down at the phone in her hand, her father still on the line. "Daddy, they're trying to close the door. They won't listen to me." Marcus's voice came through firm and clear. "Put me on speakerphone. Right now." Jasmine tapped the speaker button with trembling fingers and held the phone up. "This is Marcus Davis, CEO of Delta Airlines." Her father's voice rang out through the first-class cabin, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "This aircraft will not depart until I board." Jennifer, the flight attendant, froze, her hands still on the door mechanism. Her face went pale, the name clearly registering even if she didn't quite believe it yet. "I'm entering the jetway right now," Marcus continued. "If that door closes before I reach it, every crew member involved in this incident will be terminated immediately. Am I making myself clear?" Jennifer's mouth opened and closed without sound. The cabin had gone completely silent, every passenger within earshot suddenly paying attention, phones coming out not to ignore the situation anymore but to record what was clearly about to become a significant incident. The woman in seat 12A's smug expression faltered, uncertainty flickering across her face for the first time. "Who did you say you were?" Jennifer finally managed to ask, her voice much smaller now. Before Marcus could answer, he appeared at the aircraft door, slightly out of breath from running, his Delta CO badge clearly visible on his lanyard, his expensive suit and unmistakable authority making it immediately obvious that this was not a bluff, not a desperate lie from a troubled child, but the actual head of the entire airline stepping onto one of his own aircraft because his daughter had been abused by his employees. The change in the cabin atmosphere was instantaneous and electric. Jennifer stumbled backward, her face draining of all color. "Mr. Davis, we didn't know, I had no idea." Marcus ignored her completely, his eyes scanning the cabin until they found Jasmine, and the naked relief and anguish on his face when he saw his daughter's tear-stained face and traumatized expression was heartbreaking. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "Baby girl, I'm here. Daddy's here. You're safe now." Jasmine collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest, her whole body shaking with the release of fear and stress and pain she'd been holding for the past 30 minutes. "You hurt me, Daddy. That lady pushed me and nobody helped, and they took my phone and said I was being bad, but I wasn't. I promise I wasn't. I just wanted my seat. I just wanted to sit where you paid for me to sit." Marcus held her tighter, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek, his eyes sweeping the cabin with cold fury. "Which passenger?" he asked quietly, his voice deadly calm. "Which passenger put their hands on my daughter?" Jasmine turned, still in her father's arms, and pointed with a shaking hand at the woman sitting in seat 12A. "She's in my seat, and when I asked her to move, she said I don't belong in first class. She said people like me shouldn't be up here. She pushed me, and it hurt my shoulder, and then everyone said I was lying." The woman's face had gone from smug to panicked, her earlier confidence evaporating as she realized exactly how badly she'd miscalculated. "I barely touched her," she said quickly, her voice rising with desperation. She was being hysterical and aggressive. "I was defending myself. This has been blown completely out of proportion. Your daughter was causing a scene and disrupting the entire cabin." Marcus's eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her shrink back into the seat she'd stolen. "You assaulted my 12-year-old daughter and then gaslit her about it. You're sitting in her assigned seat right now. And my crew," he turned to look at Jennifer and the other flight attendants who'd gathered, looking terrified, "enabled your racism and blamed the victim." He pulled out his phone and made a call, never taking his other arm from around Jasmine. "This is Marcus Davis. I need airport police to gate B-17 immediately. I have a passenger who physically assaulted a minor and crew members who failed in their duty to protect an unaccompanied child in their care." "Yes, I'll wait for them." "No, this aircraft does not have permission to depart. Cancel the flight. Everyone off." The cabin erupted in protests. "Cancel the flight? We have connections. This is ridiculous." But Marcus's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "This aircraft is a crime scene. A child was assaulted, and multiple crew members violated company policy and federal regulations regarding the safety of unaccompanied minors. Everyone will deplane, provide statements if requested, and be rebooked on alternative flights. And before anyone complains about the inconvenience, remember that you all sat here and watched a 12-year-old be abused and said nothing. Not one of you spoke up. Not one of you helped. So you can spare me your complaints about delays." The guilt that washed over the cabin was palpable. Passengers who'd been so brave with their indifference were suddenly unable to meet his eyes. The black woman from seat 34B had made her way to the front, still carrying her belongings. "Mr. Davis, I'm the one who let your daughter use my phone. I just want to say that I witnessed what happened, and I'll gladly provide a statement. Every word she said is true." Marcus nodded at her with profound gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you for being the only adult on this plane who treated my daughter like she mattered." Airport police arrived within minutes, followed by Delta security personnel and corporate representatives who'd been alerted that the CEO was involved in an incident. The woman in seat 12A tried to leave, tried to blend into the deplaning passengers, but Marcus pointed her out immediately. "That one. She assaulted my daughter. She's not leaving until she's been arrested." The woman's face twisted with rage and fear. "You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? I'm Laura Whitmore. My husband is a major donor to this airline. I fly first class twice a month. I have connections. This will ruin your company." Marcus's smile was cold and without humor. "Lady, I don't care if you're married to the president. You put your hands on my child. You racially abused her. You traumatized her. And my employees enabled it. So yes, I absolutely can do this. And I will. What would you do if you were a passenger witnessing this? Would you speak up or would you stay silent? Be honest. Drop your answer below. There's no judgment here. We're all learning." The police officers approached Laura Whitmore, who was now standing in the aisle looking considerably less confident than she had been 30 minutes ago when she'd been terrorizing a child with impunity. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez with Airport Police. We need you to step off the aircraft so we can discuss what happened here. Laura drew herself up, trying to reclaim her earlier authority. I'm not going anywhere until I speak to my attorney. This man is harassing me. That child assaulted me, and now he's abusing his position to retaliate. Officer Rodriguez looked at Marcus, then at Jasmine, still wrapped in her father's arms, her face pressed against his chest, then back at Laura. Ma'am, we have multiple witnesses who say otherwise. We also have the flight manifest showing that you were assigned to seat 24B in the main cabin, but you're currently occupying seat 1-2A, which belongs to this child. Can you explain that? Laura's face flushed red. I upgraded myself. I'm a platinum member. I have status. I have the right to sit in first class if there are open seats. Marcus's voice was ice cold. There are no open seats in first class. That seat was paid for, assigned, and occupied by my daughter until you decided she didn't belong there because of the color of her skin. Officer Rodriguez pulled out his notepad. Sir, can you walk me through exactly what happened? Marcus kept one arm around Jasmine while he spoke, his other hand gently rubbing her back. My daughter boarded as an unaccompanied minor, first-class ticket, seat 12A, which I personally purchased for her. When she arrived at her assigned seat, this woman was already sitting there and refused to move. When my daughter politely asked for her seat, this woman told her she didn't belong in first class, that people like her should be in economy, and made multiple racist statements. That's a lie, Laura interrupted. I never said anything racist. Officer Rodriguez held up a hand. Ma'am, let him finish. Marcus continued, his voice steady but vibrating with controlled rage. This woman then physically pushed my daughter, leaving a mark on her shoulder. My daughter reported the assault to multiple flight attendants, all of whom dismissed her, took her phone, accused her of being disruptive, and threatened to remove her from the aircraft. Not one crew member checked her seat assignment against this woman's. Not one crew member believed a child who was telling the truth. They saw a black child and assumed she was the problem. Officer Chin, the second police officer, had been examining Jasmine's boarding pass and checking it against the seat assignment system on his tablet. Sir, this boarding pass shows 12A, first class, purchased 3 weeks ago for $627. He looked at Laura. Ma'am, what does your boarding pass show? Laura hesitated, then reluctantly pulled out her phone. Her boarding pass clearly showed 24B, main cabin, purchased 2 months ago for $212. You took a child's first-class seat and lied about it, Officer Chin said flatly. But Laura wasn't done fighting. She was loud, she was aggressive, she was making a scene. I felt threatened. I have the right to defend myself. Any physical contact was self-defense. Marcus pulled out his phone and tapped a few times. Jasmine, baby, I need you to look at me for a second. Can you show the officers where she hurt you? Jasmine turned, her eyes still red from crying, and pulled her shirt collar aside to reveal a red mark on her shoulder, a clear imprint where Laura's ring had dug into her skin when she'd pushed her. That's where she pushed me, Jasmine said quietly. It really hurt. Officer Rodriguez photographed the injury from multiple angles. Ma'am, that's evidence of battery on a minor. I'm going to need you to come with us. Laura's composure finally cracked completely. This is absurd. Are you going to arrest me over a misunderstanding? Over a seat? I'm a respected member of this community. I volunteer at my church. I have grandchildren. You're ruining my life over nothing. Marcus's voice was soft but devastating. You assaulted my 12-year-old daughter. You called her racial slurs. You tried to have her removed from a flight she had every right to be on. And now you want sympathy because there are consequences? A Delta security manager named Patricia had arrived and was reviewing the incident on her laptop, pulling up security footage from the gate area and speaking quietly with the flight attendants. Mr. Davis, she said carefully, we have footage of the initial boarding. It clearly shows that this passenger gestured to Laura, bypassing her assigned seat in the main cabin and proceeding directly to first class. We also have audio of her statements to your daughter and to crew members. She looked at Laura with professional disgust. Ma'am, you're being banned from Delta Airlines effective immediately. All your miles are forfeited. Any future reservations are canceled. Laura's face went white. You can't do that. I've been flying Delta for 20 years. I have status. I have rights. Patricia's expression didn't change. You assaulted a child and used racial slurs. That violates our contract of carriage. You have no rights to our service anymore. Officer Rodriguez took Laura's arm. Ma'am, you're under arrest for battery on a minor, making false statements to law enforcement, and we'll be adding hate crime enhancements based on the racial nature of your statements. You have the right to remain silent. As they read Laura her rights and placed her in handcuffs, her face transformed from entitled rage to genuine panic. Wait, this is a mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Can't we work this out? I'll apologize. I'll pay for her seat. Please, I can't be arrested. I have a reputation. My family. Marcus just looked at her, unmoved. You should have thought about your reputation before you hurt my daughter. You should have thought about your family before you traumatized a child. Actions have consequences, and you're about to learn that lesson very thoroughly. But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned to Jennifer and the other flight attendants who'd been standing frozen in horror as they watched their CEO dismantle a passenger and realized their own jobs were almost certainly next on the chopping block. Jennifer, he said quietly, you took my daughter's phone. You threatened to remove her from the aircraft for reporting an assault. You believed a lying adult over a truthful child because of racial bias. You're suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Davis, please, I didn't know she was your daughter. I was just trying to maintain order. I thought. Marcus cut her off. You thought a black child was lying. You thought a white woman was more credible. That's exactly the problem. And the fact that you didn't know she was my daughter is irrelevant. Every child on our planes deserves the same protection, whether their parent is a CEO or a janitor. He looked at the other flight attendants. Everyone who interacted with my daughter today and failed to help her, you're all suspended. Report to Human Resources tomorrow morning. The flight attendant, Marcus, the young black man who'd initially tried to help Jasmine before being called away, stepped forward hesitantly. Mr. Davis, sir, I tried to help her. I was going to sort out the seating issue, but I got called to handle a catering problem, and when I came back, she was gone. I should have stayed with her. I should have made it my priority. I'm so sorry. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. You're not suspended, but I expect a full written statement about what you witnessed and why you left her alone. Yes, sir, Marcus said quietly. Absolutely. I'm so sorry this happened. Jasmine, still clinging to her father, finally found her voice. Daddy, can we go home? I don't want to go to California anymore. I just want to go home. Marcus kissed the top of her head. Of course, baby girl. We're going home. Your mom is probably already on her way here. We'll reschedule your trip with Aunt Michelle for another time, and next time, one of us will fly with you. I'm so sorry you went through this. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. As they walked off the aircraft together, past rows of guilty passengers who couldn't meet their eyes, past flight attendants whose careers had just imploded, past the empty seat 12A that had started everything, Marcus made a decision. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Marcus led Jasmine off the aircraft and into the jetway, where a Delta customer service manager was already waiting with a wheelchair, even though Jasmine could walk, a bottle of water, tissues, and the kind of over-attentive concern that came from knowing the CEO's child had been traumatized on their watch. Mr. Davis, I'm Rebecca Thompson, customer service manager for this terminal. I've arranged a private room where Jasmine can rest while we sort everything out. We have medical personnel standing by if needed. Marcus nodded curtly. Thank you. We'll need that room for statements as well. Inside the private lounge, Marcus finally let himself fully examine his daughter. Jasmine sat curled up on a leather couch, still clutching the stuffed dolphin splash that she'd pulled from her backpack, looking so much younger than her 12 years, so vulnerable and hurt. Her mother, Teresa, burst through the door minutes later, having driven from their home at dangerous speeds the moment Marcus called. Baby, Teresa gasped, rushing to Jasmine and pulling her into a fierce embrace. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened to you. Jasmine dissolved into fresh tears in her mother's arms. Mommy, she was so mean. Everyone was so mean. Nobody would help me, and they said I was lying and I wasn't lying. I promise I wasn't lying. I know, baby, Teresa whispered, rocking her daughter back and forth. I know you weren't lying. We believe you. We've always believed you. Marcus sat beside them, one hand on Jasmine's back, his jaw tight with he was trying to contain for his daughter's sake. Airport police took statements from everyone involved. The black woman from seat 34B, whose name was Angela Morrison, provided a detailed account of everything she'd witnessed from her position in the back of the plane. I saw that child walk from first class to economy crying, clearly distressed, clearly in pain. When she asked to use my phone, she was terrified. She'd been dismissed, assaulted, and gaslit by multiple adults. Everything she told her father is true. Officer Rodriguez wrote everything down carefully, his expression growing harder with each detail. Other passengers were interviewed as they deplaned, and their statements painted a damning picture of collective bystander failure. Most admitted they'd seen the confrontation, seen Jasmine crying, seen her being pushed, heard the racist comments, but had convinced themselves it wasn't their business, wasn't worth getting involved, wasn't their problem. A few tried to justify their silence. I didn't want to make things worse. I thought the flight attendants would handle it. I wasn't sure what I was seeing. But their excuses rang hollow when confronted with a traumatized child who'd begged for help that never came. The flight attendant, Jennifer, was interviewed separately, and her statement revealed the depth of implicit bias that had allowed this incident to escalate. I thought the child was confused about her seat assignment. The other passengers seemed more credible. She was calm, well-dressed, and clearly a frequent flyer. The child seemed emotional and maybe not reliable. When pressed about why she'd assumed the white adult was more credible than the black child who had documentary evidence, Jennifer had no good answer. I don't know. I made an assumption. It was wrong. Laura Whitmore was processed at the airport police station, fingerprinted and photographed, her expensive jewelry and designer handbag now in an evidence bag, her entitled demeanor replaced by genuine fear as she realized how serious this had become. Her attorney arrived within the hour, a slick corporate lawyer who immediately tried to negotiate. My client is willing to apologize and provide compensation to settle this matter quietly. This doesn't need to become a public spectacle that damages everyone involved. Marcus, who'd been called to approve any settlement discussion, rejected it immediately. There will be no settlement. Your client assaulted my daughter, used racial slurs, and traumatized a child who will probably need therapy to recover from this experience. She's being charged criminally, and I will personally ensure those charges are prosecuted to the fullest extent. The attorney tried again. Mr. Davis, think about the publicity. Think about how this reflects on Delta. Wouldn't it be better to handle this discreetly? Marcus's smile was cold. The publicity is exactly what I want. I want every racist passenger to know that assaulting children on our planes has consequences. I want every employee to know that protecting passengers from discrimination is not optional. And I want every parent to know that when they trust us with their children, we will actually protect them. So no, counselor, there will be no quiet settlement. The investigation moved quickly because of Marcus's involvement and the clear evidence. Security footage showed Laura bypassing her assigned seat and taking Jasmine's. Audio recordings captured her racist statements. Photographs documented Jasmine's injury. Witness statements from Angela Morrison and others corroborated every detail of Jasmine's account. Within 48 hours, formal charges were filed: battery on a minor, making false statements to law enforcement, and hate crime enhancements that elevated the charges to felonies. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with just Laura's prosecution. He initiated a comprehensive internal investigation into how his own employees had failed so catastrophically. Flight attendant Jennifer was terminated after the investigation revealed she had 3 prior complaints about differential treatment of passengers of color, complaints that had been noted in her file but never resulted in meaningful discipline. 2 other flight attendants who'd ignored Jasmine's requests for help were also terminated. The gate supervisor who'd approved boarding without ensuring the unaccompanied minor protocols were followed was demoted. Marcus called an emergency meeting of all Delta senior leadership and made it clear that systemic changes were coming. "We failed a child in our care," he said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. We failed because our employees made racist assumptions. We failed because our protocols weren't followed. We failed because nobody in a position of power was paying attention until it was my daughter. How many other children has this happened to when there was no protocol? How many families have we failed? He implemented immediate policy changes, mandatory bystander intervention training for all crew members, a direct hotline for discrimination complaints that bypassed normal chains of command, body cameras for crew members during passenger disputes, and a complete overhaul of unaccompanied minor procedures. Any report of assault or discrimination involving a child would now trigger immediate supervisor involvement and security review. No more dismissing children's complaints. No more assuming adults were more credible. 3 weeks later, Jasmine sat with both her parents in their living room, still processing everything that had happened. She'd been having nightmares, waking up crying, afraid to go anywhere alone, questioning whether she belonged in spaces she had every right to occupy. Her parents had gotten her into therapy immediately, recognizing that trauma this severe needed professional help. "Baby girl," Marcus said gently, "I need to tell you something. Laura Whitmore took a plea deal today. She's pleading guilty to battery and hate crime charges. She'll serve 6 months in jail, 2 years probation, mandatory counseling for racial bias, and she's been ordered to pay for your therapy and provide a formal written apology." Jasmine looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. "Will I have to see her?" "No," Teresa said firmly. "Never. The apology will be in writing, and your dad will review it first. You never have to be in the same room with that woman again." "What about the flight attendants?" Jasmine asked quietly. "What happened to them?" Marcus took a breath. "Jennifer and 2 others were fired. They violated company policy and federal regulations. They failed to protect you when that was literally their job. Several others received written warnings and mandatory retraining. And we've changed our policies so this is less likely to happen to other kids." Jasmine nodded slowly, processing. "Daddy, do you think things will really change? Or will people just be more careful when you're watching?" That question, coming from his 12-year-old daughter who'd learned harsh lessons about how the world worked, broke Marcus's heart. "I think some people will change because they're actually sorry and want to do better. And some people will only change because they're afraid of consequences. But either way, the behavior changes, and that protects other kids even if the hearts don't fully change. It's not perfect, baby. Real life rarely is. But it's better than it was. Would you have apologized if you were one of those silent passengers? What would you say? Sometimes the hardest words are 'I'm sorry, I didn't help.' Drop your thoughts below." 2 months after the incident, Jasmine stood in front of a conference room full of Delta Airlines executives, flight attendants, and customer service managers. Her father had asked if she wanted to share her story as part of the new mandatory training program, and after weeks of therapy and long conversations with her parents, she'd agreed. She was terrified, her hands shaking as she held her notes, but she'd learned something important from what happened. Her voice mattered, and staying silent meant other kids might suffer. "My name is Jasmine Davis," she began, her voice quiet but steady. 2 months ago, I was assaulted on one of our planes by a passenger who thought I didn't belong in first class because I'm black. But that's not really what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about all the adults who watched it happen and did nothing. The room was completely silent, every person paying attention in a way passengers on that flight hadn't. I asked for help 5 times. I showed my boarding pass. I reported being pushed. I cried and begged and tried to explain. And almost everyone ignored me or told me I was the problem. Do you know what that feels like? To be 12 years old and have every adult around you act like your pain doesn't matter? Like you're lying even when you're telling the truth? It makes you feel like maybe you really don't belong anywhere. Likely, maybe the racist lady was right about you. Several people in the room were crying now, the weight of their collective failure sitting heavy on their shoulders. My dad changed the policies, and that's good. But policies don't mean anything if people don't care enough to follow them. You have to actually believe kids when they tell you something's wrong. You have to believe black passengers when they report discrimination. Not because it might be the CEO's daughter. Not because you're afraid of getting fired. But because it's the right thing to do. She looked around the room, making eye contact with flight attendants who would be working flights tomorrow, who would encounter passengers who needed help, who would have to choose between comfort and courage. The next time you see something wrong, I want you to think about me standing in that aisle crying while everyone walked past. And I want you to be the person who stops. Be the person who helps. Be the person who believes the victim instead of the person with power. Because if you don't, you're not really any different from the woman who pushed me. You're just quieter about your racism. The room remained silent long after she finished speaking, the truth of her words settling into hearts that needed to hear them. That evening, Jasmine sat with her parents on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the Atlanta sky in shades of orange and pink. She'd been quiet since the training session, processing the emotions that came with reliving her trauma in front of strangers. Teresa brought out hot chocolate and sat beside her daughter, wrapping a blanket around both of them. "Baby, how are you feeling about today?" Teresa asked gently. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. "I don't know. I'm glad I did it. I think maybe it helped people understand. But also, I'm still really angry. Why did it take me almost getting hurt worse for people to care? Why did you have to be the CEO for anyone to listen?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice heavy with a truth he wished he didn't have to share. "Because the world isn't fair, baby girl. Because racism is real and it's everywhere, even in 2025, even on airplanes, even in spaces where it shouldn't exist. Your mom and I have faced it our whole lives. We'd hoped by the time you grew up, things would be different enough that you wouldn't have to. But they're not different," Jasmine said, and it wasn't a question. "Not really. Not enough." Marcus shook his head. "No, baby. They're not. They're better than they were when your grandmother was young, better than when I was your age. But we still have so far to go. The progress is real, but it's slow, and it's painful, and it requires people like you to keep speaking up even when it's hard." Jasmine looked at her father, this powerful man who ran an entire airline, who had the authority to fire people and change policies, and asked the question that had been haunting her. "Daddy, if you weren't the CEO, if I were just a regular kid with regular parents, would that woman have gone to jail? Would those flight attendants have been fired? Would anything have changed?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Marcus's eyes filled with tears because he knew the truth, knew that countless black children faced similar racism with no powerful parent to intervene, no consequences for their abusers, no justice for their pain. "Probably not, baby," he finally admitted. "Probably not. And that's exactly why we have to keep fighting. For all the kids who don't have a CEO parent. For all the families who deserve justice but don't have power. We fight because we can, so maybe someday, everyone will be protected equally." 6 months later, Jasmine boarded another Delta flight, this time with both her parents beside her. She was finally ready to visit Aunt Michelle in California, but the excitement was mixed with anxiety that hadn't existed before that terrible day. As they walked down the jetway, her hand gripped her mother's tightly, her breathing quickened, trauma memory making her body tense. When they reached their seats, a flight attendant approached, a young woman with kind eyes who clearly recognized them. "Miss Davis, I just want you to know I went through the new training. Your story, what you went through, changed how I see my job. I promise that if I ever see something like that happening, I'll speak up. I'll help. You have my word." Jasmine managed a small smile, the first genuine one she'd had on an airplane since the incident. "Thank you. That means a lot." The flight was uneventful, peaceful even, but Jasmine knew this didn't mean racism on airplanes had ended. Laura Whitmore had been sentenced, crew members had been fired, policies had changed, but the deeper sickness remained. 6 months after Jasmine's assault, 3 more incidents of racial discrimination on flights had been reported and properly handled, suggesting that the problem had always been there, just previously ignored. As the plane descended into Los Angeles, Jasmine looked out the window at the city below and thought about everything she'd learned. She'd learned that racism was real and persistent. She'd learned that power mattered more than justice in a world that wasn't fair. She'd learned that most people chose comfort over courage. But she'd also learned that her voice had power, that speaking the truth could create change, that one person's story could spark a movement. Marcus watched his daughter's profile against the window and made a silent promise. He would use his position to keep fighting, keep changing policies, and keep holding people accountable. Not just for Jasmine, but but for every child who deserved to travel safely, who deserved to be believed, who deserved dignity. Teresa squeezed Jasmine's hand. "Are you ready for this adventure, baby?" Jasmine nodded, and this time her smile reached her eyes. "I'm ready." Because Jasmine had learned the most important lesson of all. She belonged everywhere, and no one's racism could take that truth away from her. She was Marcus Davis's daughter, but more importantly, she was her own person, and she would never stop speaking up. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think racial discrimination and prejudice can end? I want your honest answer. Not what you think you should say, but what you actually believe. Can we build a world where children like Jasmine don't face hatred for simply existing in spaces they've paid to occupy? What do you think needs to happen to stop this? More laws? Better enforcement? Cultural transformation? Personal accountability? Bystander intervention training? Tell us in the comments what you believe would create real change. Do you think serving justice, sentencing Laura Whitmore, firing those crew members, and changing airline policies are enough to end discrimination? Or is something deeper required? Does individual accountability matter if the culture of silence remains unchanged? Drop your thoughts below. Here's the hardest question, and I want you to search your heart for the honest answer. Have you ever stayed silent when you witnessed discrimination? What stopped you from speaking up? Was it fear of confrontation? Not wanting to get involved? Uncertainty about what you saw? And what would it take for you to intervene next time? Because there will be a next time. Discrimination didn't end with Laura Whitmore's conviction. Drop your answers in the comments. I'm reading every single one. No judgment here. Just an honest conversation about how we build the world our children deserve. And if you want racism to become a thing of the past, if you want to be like Angela Morrison, who gave Jasmine her phone when no one else would help, if you want to be like the flight attendant who promised to speak up next time, someone who chooses courage over comfort, then like this video right now. Subscribe to this channel because we're not just telling stories, we're creating accountability. We're showing that consequences are possible, that speaking up matters, that one voice can spark systemic change. Share this video so parents can talk to their children about what to do if they experience discrimination. Share it so teachers can use it to discuss bystander intervention. Share it so other victims know their stories matter, that fighting back is possible, that justice can happen even when it's rare. Every share is an act of solidarity. Every comment is a commitment to do better. Every subscription says that children's safety matters more than adult comfort. Because discrimination thrives in silence. Your voice matters. Speak up.